Why would a man surrounded by thousands, a teacher who moved hearts with every gesture, choose silence at the very moment when words could have changed history? Why, when pressed to reveal the deepest truths of existence, would he refrain, withholding what many have since called the word of fire? This question has haunted historians, theologians, and seekers alike for centuries. Jesus of Nazareth, known as healer, rebel prophet, spoke openly about compassion, forgiveness, humility, and the nearness of the kingdom of God. Yet behind the parables and miracles, there was always a sense of something more, an unspoken knowledge, a current of power that could ignite entire civilizations if revealed too soon. It was not fear for himself that silenced him, but concern for those listening. Some truths, he seemed to suggest, were too dangerous to hand over to unprepared minds, and so he wrapped them not in syllables, but in silence. In that silence, an invisible frequency resonated, a spark that history would come to describe as the word of fire. In the ancient world, words were not casual tools. They were forces. In Hebrew tradition, the universe itself was believed to have been created. By divine speech, let there be light. For the Essenes, Pharisees, and mystical teachers of the law, the spoken word was not symbolic but generative, a command that shaped reality. Jesus lived in this environment, where language was fire, where vibration itself could bless or destroy. While the crowds were nourished with parables about seeds, vines, and shepherds, his closest disciples received something far more cryptic: layers of meaning, whispers of codes that pointed toward a hidden flame of consciousness. The word of fire was not just teaching, it was ignition and inner revolution. Once kindled, it could never be extinguished. The silence of Jesus stands out like a thunderclap in history. Before Pilate, when one word of defense might have swayed his fate, he remained still. In moments when a single declaration could have mobilized rebellion against Rome, he withheld. This was not weakness, it was strategy. He knew that revealing the inner flame to a society still chained by fear and empire would be like throwing pearls before swine, wasting what was sacred on those unready to bear it. And in that decision lay both preservation and provocation. His silence became a form of resistance, a weapon more dangerous than swords because it demanded inner awakening rather than external conquest. Rome itself feared silence as much as speech. The empire could tolerate philosophers, mystics, and sect leaders as long as their words did not mobilize the masses. But a doctrine that claimed divine authority resided not in Caesar, but within every human soul that was intolerable. The word of fire, if spoken aloud and misunderstood, could have sparked revolt across provinces. Rome relied on hierarchy, order, and control. Jesus offered a kingdom that burned from within, beyond chains, beyond taxes, beyond imperial decrees. For the authorities, this was not just theology, it was geopolitical subversion. So the master disguised dynamite within simplicity. He spoke of lilies of the field, of mustard seeds, of hidden treasure, wrapping revolutionary truths in agricultural metaphors that seemed harmless to those outside. But to the few who could truly listen, the parables were not entertainment. They were codes, maps pointing to a fire that, once awakened, would consume illusion itself. Silence became his shield. Stillness became his secret delivery system. He was not hiding weakness. He was hiding a weapon too powerful to be mishandled. What then was this word of fire? Not a syllable to be repeated like a magical chant. Not a password to unlock divine power. It was vibration itself, a resonance older than Hebrew, deeper than Aramaic, alive before the first civilizations rose. The apocryphal Gospel of Thomas hints at it. If what is within you is not brought forth, what is outside you will destroy you. These were not poetic flourishes, but direct references to an inner frequency, the voice that burns without consuming, a fire that waits in every human chest. To speak it out loud would have been folly. To awaken it within was destiny. History offers fragments. The Essenes spoke of sacred sounds that could heal, raise the dead, and command the elements. Gnostic texts whispered of a primordial vibration that carried creation's blueprint. Early mystics, both Jewish and Greek, experimented with letter combinations, mantras, and sacred tones, convinced that sound itself could bend reality, and in every account there is caution. Misuse could lead to madness, distortion, chaos. This was knowledge as dangerous as nuclear energy in our modern age, a power that could liberate or annihilate. Jesus knew that unleashing it in the wrong hands would not accelerate human evolution but collapse it into fanaticism and destruction. Instead, he embodied the flame. His silence was not absence but presence. Every glance, every gesture, every healing act was imbued with resonance. Those who encountered him often spoke of their hearts burning, of a forgotten spark reigniting, of being transformed without explanation. The word of fire was not something he said. It was something he radiated. He carried it as a field, an atmosphere, an invisible current that restructured reality around him. Those with ears to hear sensed it. Those with hardened hearts dismissed it as madness, but none left unchanged. Across centuries, seekers tried to rediscover this word. Alchemists in medieval Europe pursued the philosopher's fire. Sufi poets in Persia spoke of the inner flame that annihilates the ego. Kabbalists calculated divine names encoded in scripture, convinced that sound was the architecture of creation. Indian sages explored mantras, believing syllables like Om were the very vibrations of the universe itself. All traditions pointed toward the same truth. The word of fire is not written in books. It is awakened in silence. Yet what Jesus guarded most carefully was timing. Humanity's ability to wield power has always outpaced its wisdom to handle it. Just as modern nations struggle with nuclear weapons and genetic engineering, ancient societies were not ready for a revelation that declared divinity within every person. The danger was clear. Such knowledge could destabilize empires, challenge priesthoods, and ignite uncontrollable revolts. Silence, then, was protection not for himself, but for humanity. He chose to wait, to trust that time and suffering would ripen hearts. The fire could not be extinguished, only delayed until we were ready to bear it. The absence of the word, paradoxically, became the greatest revelation of all, for in that silence lay an invitation to stop seeking externally, to dive within, to confront the shadow, to listen to the unspeakable. The true word of fire is not broadcast, not shouted, not proclaimed. It is awakened in solitude, in courage, in the surrender of all illusions. And once lit, it transforms everything. Darkness cannot resist. Structures of oppression crumble, fear dissolves. This is why, perhaps, his greatest teaching was not in what he said, but in what he refused to say. His silence remains history's most eloquent sermon, still burning, still waiting, still summoning humanity to ignite. Long before the Gospels were compiled, before councils in distant imperial cities decided what would remain and what would be erased, the ancients already understood that language was not mere sound. Words were not ornaments. They were instruments of power. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Israel, to name something was to summon it. To speak was to bind, to create, or to destroy. When Jesus entered history, he carried this awareness into every gesture. Hebrew and Aramaic, the tongues of his day, were not just systems of grammar. They were energetic codes. The Torah itself was considered alive because the arrangement of letters was believed to radiate force. To read it was not simply to learn, it was to stand in a field of vibration. In this atmosphere, the word of fire is not a metaphor. It is the key to reality itself. Mystical schools of the time believed certain sound combinations could cure illness, alter consciousness, even shift the forces of nature. Priests whispered sacred names of God with trembling caution, for one misplaced syllable could unleash imbalance. Jesus was no stranger to this knowledge. When he stilled a storm with a command, or called Lazarus from the tomb, it was not theatrical. Magic, it was resonance, the precise striking of a frequency. To the uninitiated, these were miracles. To those with eyes to see, it was mastery of vibration. And here lies the heart of the mystery. The word of fire was not a secret phrase to be repeated like a spell, but a frequency embedded in creation itself. A living code. a sound that could not be misused without catastrophic consequence. Consider the context. The Roman Empire was built on the control of bodies and minds. Its legions crushed rebellions. Its propaganda glorified Caesar as divine. Its censors silenced voices that threatened stability. A teaching that declared words themselves were divine fire capable of liberating the inner world was nothing short of revolutionary. Jesus, fully aware, cloaked the truth in silence. He revealed only fragments, veiling the rest. Had he shouted it from rooftops, Rome would have seen not a teacher but an insurrectionist wielding spiritual weapons. And so, the silence became his shield. Even within Jewish mysticism, there was fear of misuse. Kabbalists later spoke of Shem HaMephoresh, the explicit name of God, encoded in 72 combinations of letters from Exodus. These names, said to govern forces of nature, were too dangerous for common use. Only the purest, most disciplined initiates dared approach them. Jesus would have known this. He embodied divine compassion but also discernment. He understood that the word of fire was like a cosmic sword. It could liberate the enslaved or, in reckless hands, enslave the free. So he never offered it lightly. When, he warned, it is not what goes into a man that defiles him but what comes out. He was not simply moralizing about speech. He was pointing to vibration itself, the truth that words are born not from lips alone, but from the inner state of being. A word can emerge from ego, dripping with poison, or from spirit, radiating healing. The fire of the word is released only when the heart is aligned with love. This was his hidden pedagogy, not to repeat formulas but to purify the vessel until the vibration emerged naturally. The word of fire, therefore, is not memorized. It is embodied. Across cultures, the same principle surfaced. In Egypt, priests spoke spells not as recitations but as activation sound engineering that aligned human and cosmic forces. In India, Sanskrit syllables were revered as mantras, each carrying a specific impact on body and soul. The sacred Om was not a symbol, but the vibration of the universe itself. Everywhere, humanity intuited the same truth. Sound is creation. The word is fire when consciousness ignites it. Jesus stood at the crossroads of these traditions. He did not merely know them, he was the living intersection. And through him, silence itself became sound. Presence itself became speech. There are accounts that he spent entire nights in prayer, not reciting lines by rote, but plunging into the vibration of the divine. His disciples often awoke to find him alone in the wilderness, wrapped in a silence that was anything but empty. These were not words to be heard. They were currents to be felt. In such moments, the word of fire was alive within him, not as syllables, but as fusion, as flame, as the very pulse of creation moving through his body. It was prayer beyond language. It was being itself. Those who approached him felt it. Not logically, but viscerally. A touch, a gaze, a silence in his presence reordered lives. The blind saw, the broken stood, the despairing found hope. These were not mechanical healings. They were attunements, resonance between his inner flame and the hidden spark within others. The word of fire was never broadcast as propaganda. It was transmitted as vibration. In this lies one of history's greatest secrets. The most powerful sound is not heard by the ears but by the soul. And so we return to the meaning of his silence. It was not coy mysticism, not the vanity of withholding. It was protection and act of love. He knew the world was not yet ready to hold such fire. By remaining silent, he preserved the secret until hearts matured enough to bear it. In this way, silence became pedagogy, the cosmic lesson that absence can teach more than presence. The word of fire is not found in hidden scrolls, nor locked within secret societies. It burns in those who have purified themselves enough to hear what was never said. Today, as science explores sound therapy, quantum vibration, and the healing properties of frequency, we edge closer to what ancient mystics always knew. Atoms are not solid. They are vibrations. Words spoken with intent shape water, cells, and fields around us. Research confirms what Jesus embodied. Vibration organizes reality. He understood that careless speech destabilizes, but the word of fire reorganizes, heals, and awakens. He carried this knowledge not to dazzle but to ignite. And when he withheld, it was because he knew the fire could not be delivered to children, lest they burn the house down before learning to build. Centuries after the crucifixion, the memory of that hidden fire continued to flicker in forbidden texts and whispered traditions. The councils of the early church, convened under the shadow of emperors, did not merely select gospels for spiritual clarity, they selected for political survival. At Nicaea in 325 AD, bishops argued not only about theology but about control. Which words would unite an empire, and which would fracture it? Which truths would reinforce authority, and which might awaken dangerous independence in the faithful? The canonical Gospels that survived Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John offered a coherent narrative for Rome's new religion. Yet what they left out may be just as telling. The apocryphal and Gnostic texts, burned or buried, often contained sparks of a deeper mystery, the living echoes of the Word of Fire. When the Gospel of Thomas surfaced in 1945 in the sands of Nag, Hammadi, Egypt, the world glimpsed again at those forbidden embers. Unlike the familiar Gospels, it did not weave chronology or miracle stories. Instead, it offered sayings short, enigmatic, demanding. Its first line sets the tone. These are the secret words which the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote them down. The word secret here is no accident. It implies layers, levels, truths too potent for casual ears. Among them is a phrase, "If they ask you, 'Where are you from?' say to them, 'We come from the light, from the place where the light came into being by itself.'" This is not metaphorical light. It is reference to the primordial fire, the vibrational origin of creation itself. The Gospel of Philip deepens the puzzle. It declares, "The word is alive when it is spoken, for it is pronounced by life." Here, sacredness does not lie in repetition or formula, but in vitality. Words without consciousness are hollow. Words carrying the fire are life itself. This explains why Jesus could not entrust the hidden frequency to ritual recitation. It would become empty dogma. The fire cannot be caged. It must be lived. And when he remained silent, he was pointing to this truth. That silence filled with presence transforms more deeply than speech without spirit. Another remarkable text is the Gospel of Mary, attributed to Mary Magdalene. In it, Mary is portrayed not as a marginal follower, but as the disciple who understood what others could not. When she reveals hidden teachings, Peter resists her authority. The conflict is telling. The word of fire rooted in intuition, equality, and liberation was incompatible with patriarchal structures of power. It could not be institutionalized. It could not be domesticated by hierarchy. It was too dangerous, too free, too ungovernable. And so, voices like Mary's were suppressed. The flame was hidden not because it was false, but because it was too true. This is where geopolitics merges with spirituality. Empires, ancient or modern, thrive on control. Unpredictable fire is a threat, a teaching that declares divinity within. Each person undermines every throne and temple. Imagine the destabilizing power of millions awakened to their inner flame, recognizing no mediator but their own awakened spirit. Such knowledge could not be tolerated by emperors or bishops. So, the Apocrypha were condemned as heresy. Yet the word heresy itself comes from the Greek heresis, meaning simply choice. The real crime was not doctrinal error, but the existence of alternative paths. Rome chose unity over truth, politics over flame. The bridges leading to the word of fire were not destroyed, only buried beneath centuries of ash. Still, embers survived. The Essenes, with whom many scholars believe Jesus was connected, cultivated sacred words in silence. They believed in an original sound predating creation, a cosmic vibration resonating like fire in the purified soul. Their deserts became laboratories of silence where ego fell away, and the inner flame began to whisper. The Book of Enoch, another text excluded from canon, speaks of angels guarding divine names, seals of fire too dangerous for uninitiated mortals. These guardians were not mythic gatekeepers, but symbols of the responsibility that comes with power. Knowledge without conscience is destruction, and the word of fire in the wrong hands could enslave rather than liberate. Jesus, aware of this, left maps in his actions. Each parable was the edge of a scroll. Each healing was a cipher. Each silence was an invitation to look beyond the literal. To those with courage, the fragments pointed inward, toward a fire that could never be written, only awakened. His pedagogy was not about information, but transformation. He was less a teacher of doctrine than an alchemist of souls, transmuting suffering into light, despair into courage, silence into resonance. The word of fire was not a doctrine to be recited, but a reality to be lived. Even today, this dynamic persists. Institutions often fear truths that cannot be controlled. Power prefers predictability. But the word of fire is not predictable. It consumes falsehoods, strips illusions, and demands radical authenticity. It cannot be marketed, managed, or censored. It can only be lived. That is why even in our age, with digital archives and libraries of knowledge, the word of fire is not found on screens or shelves. It is encountered in silence, in surrender, in the courage to burn away all that is false. It requires no empire's permission, no priest's blessing. It waits alive in every human being just beyond fear. And here lies the paradox. The Gospels left out of the canon are not threats to faith. They are opportunities for liberation. They remind us that truth was never meant to be monopolized. The word of fire is too vast for dogma, too wild for institutions, too luminous to be hidden forever. The councils may have obscured it, but they could not extinguish it. The fragments remain like embers beneath ash, waiting for breath, waiting for courage, waiting for souls ready to reignite them. For the path of fire is not horizontal, chasing after external signs. It is vertical, descending from mind into silence, from illusion into essence. And in that descent, the word burns once more. From the deserts of Judea to the halls of Greek philosophy, one truth echoed across cultures. Revelation must be guarded until the soul is ready. For the unprepared, wisdom becomes a weapon, knowledge becomes a curse. This is why initiation existed, why mysteries were veiled in symbols and silence. The fire that illuminates can also destroy. And so when Jesus walked among fishermen, tax collectors, and zealots, he balanced compassion with caution. He offered parables to the crowds, but to those willing to walk deeper, he unveiled mysteries in whispers, in gestures, in silences that said more than words ever could. To you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom, he told his disciples, but to them it is not given. This was not elitism, it was responsibility. In antiquity, initiation was the highest safeguard. The Eleusinian mysteries of Greece did not disclose their secrets to the public. To do so would have been sacrilege. Egyptian hierophants demanded years of silence, fasting, and testing before entrusting the initiate with sacred knowledge. Among the Essenes, silence was not absence, but preparation, the stripping away of ego's noise so that truth could be heard. All these traditions carried one principle. Some truths cannot be explained, they must be lived. And the word of fire, vibrating beyond the reach of language, was among them. The initiation Jesus offered was not a formal ceremony. It was transformation itself. It was felt in his gaze that stripped illusions, in his touch that reawakened the forgotten spark, in the field of his presence that reordered lives. Those who drew near experienced something they could not name, an ancient memory, a hidden fire, stirring, a resonance that felt more familiar than their own heartbeat. This was the effect of true initiation, not information, but ignition. It was revelation that burned away what was false until only essence remained. Not everyone responded the same way. Some heard his words and dismissed them as riddles. Others were scandalized, threatened, enraged. Still others tried to trap him in debates, demanding he define truth in words. But he never surrendered to verbal traps. He answered with parables, with questions, with silence. He knew that real understanding does not arrive through argument, but through perception, through a shift in consciousness that cannot be forced. Initiation was not privilege, it was calling. Only those tired of the surface, weary of illusions, willing to face the unknown could hear the invitation, and hearing it they risked everything, because initiation was death. It required the death of the mask, the persona, the manufactured identity. To step into the fire was to surrender everything. The ego clung to status, pride, certainty. That is why so many mystical traditions spoke of the dark night of the soul, of purification through solitude, of trials that stripped the initiate bare. Jesus himself walked this path 40 days in the desert, stripped of comfort, facing hunger and temptation, preparing himself to embody the word. He did not hide the fire out of cruelty. He veiled it out of compassion, knowing that each soul must walk through its own desert before the flame can dwell within. This is also why sacred words have been abused through history. Even the scriptures, meant to liberate, were twisted into weapons of oppression, justifying wars, crusades, inquisitions. If ordinary words could be distorted so easily, what would have happened if the word of fire had been revealed to the masses in its fullness? Knowledge without conscience is destruction. Truth without love is tyranny. And so Jesus protected both humanity and the sacred flame itself by keeping silent. In that silence, he preserved purity, yet he did not leave the world without witnesses. He entrusted the fire to a network of initiates, a silent lineage stretching across centuries, not saints crowned by churches, not emperors or bishops, but hidden souls, nameless and unrecognized, who carried the vibration quietly. Their lives became living vessels of the unspoken word. This invisible chain ensured that the fire would never vanish, even when empires rose and fell, when dogmas silenced dissent, when scriptures were edited and burned. The fire lived on in silence, passed from heart to heart. The initiation Jesus offered was not an exclusive club. It was a radical invitation, a call to awaken to a truth that transcended religion, culture, and tradition, a truth that burns illusions, dissolves fear, and calls the soul to authenticity. This was not comfort, it was awakening. And once awakened, there was no return to sleep. The fire does not negotiate with ego. It demands transformation. It calls for death to the false self and rebirth into the eternal. And that is why it was veiled, not to exclude, but to prepare. This path remains neither easy nor linear. To receive, the word of fire is to be consumed and remade. It demands courage, patience, faith. It strips comfort, challenges certainty, dismantles illusions. Yet it rewards with what no book can give and no ritual can guarantee: the direct experience of truth. The silence of Jesus, far from concealment, was an act of love, a shield around humanity, until it was strong enough to burn without being destroyed. And so the story of initiation is not about hiding secrets in caves or libraries. It is about becoming the secret. To walk this path is to embody the fire, to radiate it without words, to live as its vessel. The word of fire is not taught. It is awakened. And when it awakens, the being no longer merely speaks of truth, they become the truth itself. Throughout his journey, fire was never far from Jesus, not as a physical blaze, but as a symbol, a metaphor, a hidden current that pulsed beneath his words. He spoke of fire not as punishment, but as transformation. "I have come to bring fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled," he declared. This was not a prophecy of destruction, but of ignition, the awakening of a latent flame in the human spirit. His message was clear: the world would not be changed by armies or decrees, but by a fire within, a fire that consumes illusions and refines essence until only truth remains. In the Jewish tradition, fire was always double-edged. It was the flame of the burning bush where God revealed his name to Moses, a fire that burned but did not consume. It was also the purifying flame of Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from heaven to expose falsehood and reveal divine power. Jesus inherited this legacy but internalized it. Where Elijah burned external altars, Jesus burned the false idols hidden within the human heart: ego, fear, greed, and despair. His fire was not for the sky, but for the soul. This fire becomes most visible in the moment of Pentecost, after Jesus' ascension. The disciples, frightened and leaderless, suddenly found tongues of flame resting upon them. They began to speak in languages they did not know, filled with courage they had never possessed. Here, the fire Jesus had guarded erupted, not through his own lips but through those who had walked with him. The word of fire, long protected, began to spread, no longer contained in one man but alive in a community. The silence of the Master became the voice of his disciples, each carrying the flame in their own tongue, their own way. Agricultural metaphors reinforced the same lesson. When Jesus spoke of wheat and weeds, he said the weeds would be burned, not as cruelty but as purification. Fire was never the enemy. Fire was the great separator, exposing what was real and consuming what was false. The word of fire does not destroy life. It destroys illusions. And in that destruction, life is freed. Yet here lies the danger. Most prefer the comfort of weeds to the furnace of transformation. To invite the fire is to risk everything, to let go of masks, identities, and comforts. The fire asks, do you wish to remain shadow or dare you burn into light? Around the world, other traditions carried similar images. Shamans walked across embers to symbolize passage between worlds. Hindus described Kundalini as a sacred fire coiled within, waiting to rise. Taoists spoke of burning ki, an inner flame of vitality and transformation. In all traditions, the fire represented not destruction but awakening. With Jesus, this imagery reached its ultimate form, baptism by fire, the initiation not of water alone, but of spirit. John the Baptist declared it, I baptize you with water for repentance, but one is coming who will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. Water cleanses the surface. Fire transforms the core. The courage required for this fire cannot be overstated. To approach it is to surrender control. It strips the ego of its defenses, refuses to negotiate with illusions, and burns away every comfort built on falsehood. This is why so many fled from it. It was easier to cling to religion as ritual, to dogma as shelter, to politics as authority. But the fire refused to be domesticated. It was never about institutions. It was always about transformation. Jesus' words were not the fire. His silence was not the fire. His very being was the fire. And those willing to stand in his presence felt it not as doctrine but as reality. That is why he told his followers, keep your lamps burning. The lamp was not an object of ritual. It was a metaphor for vigilance, for awakened consciousness. The word of fire is this lamp within, the inner flame that guides when the world is dark. To let it go out is to live half alive, shadows of what we are meant to be. To keep it lit requires practice silence, watchfulness, inner attention. This is no gift given once, but a daily renewal. A flame rekindled with every act of love, every breath of awareness. Those who carried this flame were never the same, not because their problems vanished, but because their perception shifted. Suffering was no longer punishment but purification. Death ceased to be an end and became passage. The world itself became a mirror, reflecting back the fire they now carried. They became agents of transformation, not victims of circumstance. They became the living gospel, not written on scrolls but inscribed in their actions, their compassion, their presence. They no longer spoke of the word of fire. They became the word itself, silent, unquenchable, untamed. And so, the silence of Jesus takes on its fullest meaning. He did not refuse to speak. He chose to burn. His silence was love. His silence was wisdom. His silence was a strategy to protect a fire that could consume the unready. By withholding, he taught. By remaining silent, he ensured that the flame would survive beyond him, passed not through phrases, but through presence. This is why 2,000 years later, the fire still burns not in libraries but in souls that dare to awaken. For millennia, humanity has sensed what modern science only now begins to confirm. Everything vibrates. Atoms are not solid objects, but rhythmic fields of energy. Matter itself is a dance of frequencies. Ancient mystics, without electron microscopes or quantum equations, already intuited this truth. They declared that the universe was sung into being, that sound, vibration, and word are the engines of creation. When Jesus spoke of the power of words, he was not using metaphor. He was speaking of physics before its time, of a resonance that could build worlds or dismantle them. The word of fire was not letters, not syllables, but the purest frequency of vibrational password connecting humanity to the foundation of reality. Japanese researcher Masaru Emoto's controversial studies on water crystallization, though debated, captured the imagination of millions. When words of love and gratitude were directed at water, crystals formed with symmetry and beauty. When words of hate were spoken, the structures collapsed into chaos. Our bodies are mostly water. What then does every word we utter, every vibration we absorb do to the temple of our flesh? Jesus warned, "It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles, but what comes out." His warning was vibrational. Words do not merely convey meaning, they reconfigure matter. The word of fire, being the purest of frequencies, is the sound that heals by aligning, awakens by vibrating, purifies by existing. The ancients encoded this mystery in letters and names. In Hebrew mysticism, every letter was not just a character, but a channel of energy. When arranged with precision, they did not merely spell words, they shaped realities. The sacred tetragrammaton, YHWH, was so potent it was forbidden to pronounce. The power lay not in superstition but in vibration. To utter the divine name was to resonate with creation itself, an act too dangerous for careless tongues. Jesus, trained in these traditions, carried a knowledge deeper still. Beyond letters, beyond names, there exists a sound older than language. The word of fire was this sound, pure vibration, alive before alphabets, waiting in silence for the soul brave enough to hear. In the East, parallel truths emerged. The Sanskrit syllable Om was called the vibration of the cosmos, the resonance that sustains existence. Tibetan monks intoned mantras believed to dissolve the illusion of matter. Sufi dervishes spun to chants that broke the veil between human and divine. Everywhere, across continents and centuries, mystics stumbled upon fragments of the same secret. Sound is a bridge. Language is not symbolic, it is vibrational engineering. The word of fire belongs to this lineage. It is not repetition. It is not chant, it is not ritual. It is the ignition of resonance itself, the alignment of the soul with the original frequency of creation. Modern science now gropes at these truths through the lens of cymatics, the study of sound made visible. When frequencies vibrate across water or sand, they form patterns, geometric mandalas etched by invisible waves. If ordinary sound produces such beauty, what might the word of fire unleash? A frequency so pure, so aligned with the source that it reconfigures not only water and matter but the very structure of consciousness itself. It is no wonder Jesus refused to release it casually. To hand such a key to those ruled by ego would be to unleash chaos. To entrust it only to the purified was an act of love. When people gathered near him, they felt it, not as noise, but as transformation. Their hearts warmed, their fears dissolved, their bodies healed. This was not superstition. It was resonance. His presence itself was the word of fire embodied. He did not need to speak it, he was it. Every silence, every breath, every gesture radiated a vibration that restructured reality around him. Those who could tune to it were never the same. Those who could not dismissed him, or feared him, or sought to silence him. Yet the vibration remained indestructible, timeless, beyond crucifixion, beyond empire. Fire cannot be killed. It only waits to burn again. And here lies the danger. Distortion. History is littered with examples of sacred words twisted into tools of control. Scriptures have justified crusades, inquisitions, and tyranny. If common words could be weaponized, imagine the devastation had the word of fire been revealed prematurely. Jesus, foreseeing this, cloaked it in silence. not to deny but to delay, not to hide but to protect. The fire was too sacred to be entrusted to greed, too transformative to be imprisoned by dogma. It had to remain unsaid, waiting for the soul, not the institution, to ignite it. Yet silence is not absence. Silence is space. It is invitation. In silence, the word of fire reverberates, waiting for each being to hear, not with ears, but with the soul. To awaken it requires not ritual but surrender, not study but silence. It requires courage to face shadows, humility to dismantle masks, love to burn away fear. The word of fire is not taught, it is remembered, and when remembered, it does not echo outside, it resounds within, shaking every cell, reconfiguring every thought, burning away everything that is not truth until only essence remains. Across cultures and centuries, the notion of a forbidden sound emerges again and again, a name, a syllable, a vibration so sacred it could never be entrusted to the unprepared. In Hebrew tradition, this was the tetragrammaton, YHWH, the ineffable name of God. It was not a word like any other. It was a living code, a bridge between realms. So potent was its resonance that even the high priest spoke it only once a year, on Yom Kippur, in the sanctum of the temple, hidden from public ears. To misuse it was to risk imbalance, spiritual collapse, even destruction. The ancients did not invent these fears from superstition. They knew deeply that sound wields power. In that context, the word of fire was not just hidden, it was protected, quarantined, guarded like divine fire stolen from heaven. Jesus inherited this knowledge, but he carried it further. He understood that the true word of fire was not bound by Hebrew letters, not confined to scrolls or rituals. It was older than language itself, a frequency humming beneath creation, waiting for those prepared to awaken it. He never pronounced it because it could not be pronounced. To speak it would be to limit it, to reduce infinite resonance into fragile syllables. Instead, he embodied it. He carried it in his presence. He radiated it in silence. This was the forbidden sound, not hidden in words but hidden in being. Early mystics sensed this. In Gnostic writings, we hear of the ineffable name, a sound that cannot be written because it dissolves illusion the moment it is released. To speak it is to tear the veil, to awaken the Christ within, to reconnect with the origin of creation. In Eastern traditions, the parallel is clear. Tibetan adepts preserve mantras too powerful to be given to novices. Sufi mystics meditate on the 99 names of Allah, each one a frequency that reshapes the soul. In all cases, sound is not decoration, it is activation. The word of fire belongs in this same lineage, not memorized but lived, not repeated but embodied, not taught but awakened. The Bible itself hints at this hidden resonance. When Moses asked God, "What is your name?" At the burning bush, the answer was, "I am that I am." In Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. This was not a name in the conventional sense. It was a vibrational affirmation of existence itself, a mantra of being. When Jesus later declared, "Before Abraham was, I am," he was not boasting of identity. He was activating that same eternal frequency. He was vibrating the word of fire through his very being. Those with ears to hear knew he was not speaking ego, but essence. It was a declaration that the divine flame burns within all who dare awaken. The danger, of course, was distortion. A word of such power could not be handled by empires obsessed with control or by egos hungry for domination. Knowledge without conscience is ruin. Just as nuclear energy can light cities or destroy them, the word of fire could heal or enslave. Jesus' silence was not cowardice, it was strategy. He did not deny the forbidden sound. He veiled it, waiting for a humanity mature enough to resonate with it without corruption. His parables, his healings, his presence, all were preparations for the day the fire would be awakened within, not handed down from above. Even in his silence, fragments slipped through. The very name Yeshua from Yehoshua, God saves, contained syllables resonant with the divine. His miracles often hinged on simple commands. Be still, rise, come forth. The power was not in the vocabulary but in the vibration, the alignment of his whole being with the source. Every word he spoke carried more than meaning, it carried resonance. This is why crowds felt transformed even when they did not fully understand. His words were not arguments. They were activations. And so the tradition of the forbidden sound persists, not as a relic of superstition but as a reality of resonance. The word of fire is not dangerous because it is evil. It is dangerous because it is pure. It cannot be wielded by divided hearts, by minds shackled to fear, by egos intoxicated with control. It is a sun too bright for unready eyes. But to those prepared, it is life. It is freedom. It is the flame that burns without consuming. And when it awakens, it cannot be silenced. For it is not a word to be spoken, but a fire to be lived. Though cloaked in mystery, the word of fire has never truly been absent. It is not hidden in desert caves nor locked in the archives of monasteries. It is not the possession of priests, councils, or scholars. It is within, ancient and alive, waiting for those who dare to silence the noise and listen to the depths of their own soul. Jesus did not conceal it to exclude, but to protect. He placed it where no empire could seize it, no inquisitor could burn it, no ruler could corrupt it inside the human spirit itself. There, it cannot be stolen. It can only be remembered. The first step toward this remembrance is silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. The common mind is cluttered with fragments, anxieties, judgments, comparisons, fears. This noise drowns the subtle frequency of the inner flame. To hear the word of fire, one must first quiet what is not the word. True silence is not passive. It is radical, demanding courage to strip away illusions, humility to sit in emptiness, and faith to wait for what cannot be manufactured. It is in this silence that the vibration stirs, first as a whisper, then as warmth, finally as certainty. Unexplainable yet undeniable. This process is not comfortable. To awaken the fire is to die to the false self, to shed identities that never belong to us. The ego resists, clinging to masks, power, and control. But the fire does not negotiate. It burns everything that is not real, leaving only essence. This is why awakening has always been described as death and rebirth. The constructed self perishes, and the eternal self emerges naked, luminous, unafraid. Jesus embodied this pattern in his desert fasting, his silence before Pilate, his death and resurrection. Each was a passage through fire, a demonstration that life begins where illusion ends. The ancients spoke of suffering as fuel for the flame. Every trial endured with presence, every loss embraced with faith, every tear shed with humility becomes wood for the sacred fire. It is not punishment, but purification. Pain, when accepted, burns away illusions faster than comfort ever could. Jesus' silence on the cross was not resignation but ignition. In suffering, he revealed that the flame does not die when the body breaks. Instead, it burns brighter, consuming fear, conquering death. The word of fire is eternal precisely because it does not depend on form, it transcends it. Practices across the world echo this path. The Sufis whirl until the ego dissolves into silence. Yogis breathe until the body becomes pure resonance. Monks sit in stillness until words fall away and only vibration remains. All are tuning the inner instrument, aligning themselves with the primal frequency. And when alignment comes, the word of fire is not heard but felt. It is not information but transformation. It is not a concept but a state of being. It cannot be defined because it defines us. It cannot be taught because it awakens us. Gratitude becomes the natural bridge to this state. To give thanks not only for blessings but for trials, not only for joys but for sorrows, aligns the heart with truth. Gratitude lifts vibration closer to the divine, preparing the soul as a vessel for the flame. Similarly, acts of compassion, small gestures of kindness, forgiveness without condition, love without expectation feed the fire. The word of fire is nourished by love because it is love's vibration itself. Every selfless act is a spark. Every sincere forgiveness is fuel. Every humble silence is oxygen for the flame. Nature itself sings this truth. The fire of the sun, the rhythm of the waves, the whisper of the wind in trees, all are echoes of the unspoken word. The universe is not mute. It vibrates with the frequency of its source. The word of fire is present in every bird's song, every heartbeat, every breath. Humanity's task is not to invent it, but to remember it, to realize that the same vibration that ignited the stars burns silently in our own chest. The silence of Jesus was never withholding. It was a map pointing inward, urging us to find the flame already alive. When it ignites, life changes forever. Words spoken from this flame are no longer mere communication, they become healing, direction, illumination. Actions guided by it no longer serve ego, they become living gospels written not on paper but in presence. To awaken the word of fire is not to possess a secret, it is to become it. And once it burns, it cannot be extinguished. The flame continues, unquenchable, silent, and eternal, waiting for all who dare to surrender into its light. Much of what Jesus lived was never written down. The fragments we hold today, the Gospels, the letters, the scattered apocrypha, are mere shadows of a reality that was too vast, too luminous, to fit into ink and parchment. His mission was never to establish an institution or dictate rigid rules. He did not come to leave a manual, but to become the manual himself, to be the incarnate word, a living flame, a frequency in human form. And it was through this embodiment, not through scrolls, that the most important lesson was given. The truth that cannot be spoken must be lived. When we read the silences of Jesus, they reveal more than his words. Before Pilate, his silence thundered, louder than any defense. When asked to display signs, he answered with riddles. When pressed to reveal the truth, he remained still. This was not weakness. It was pedagogy. The silence was fertile soil, where those who truly sought could plant the seed of inquiry and wait for the fire within to answer. His refusal to reveal everything was not omission, but strategy. To hand the word of fire to unready ears would have been to destroy both the hearer and the teaching. By hiding it within silence, he placed it where no empire could seize it, no council could edit it, no enemy could extinguish it. And yet, he left enough clues for the brave to follow. The kingdom of God is within you, he declared. You are God's. On that day you will know that I am in you and you in me. These were not pious slogans. They were vibrational codes, subtle invitations pointing toward the truth hidden in every soul. He wanted not blind followers, but mirrors, people who would awaken to the same fire, reflect the same flame, and carry it forward. The disciples who received this vibration did not simply hear sermons. They experienced transformation. Their lives became proof of a resonance that could not be silenced. History, however, chose control over fire. The councils canonized some texts and discarded others, shaping doctrine into walls rather than windows. But the flame was never trapped. In monasteries, deserts, caves, and hidden communities, mystics carried embers across centuries. They knew the difference between information and initiation. They understood that the word of fire is not found in ink but in experience. Their silence, like his, preserved the flame until humanity ripened enough to ignite it once again. This is the paradox. The greatest revelation is not in what was said, but in what was left unsaid. By not revealing the word, Jesus ensured that every seeker would be forced inward. If he had spoken it aloud, it would have become superstition, repeated like a spell, degraded into dogma. But in silence, it remained pure, waiting to be discovered, where it had always lived in the human soul. His silence was trust, a gamble on humanity's future courage to burn. And today, the choice remains. Will we continue searching for answers outside chasing dogma, gurus, miracles, or will we risk silence, descend into the abyss of our own soul, and ignite the flame waiting there? The word of fire is not another doctrine to be memorized, nor another ritual to be performed. It is a frequency of being, a living fire that consumes illusion and leaves only truth. It does not ask for belief but for surrender. It demands not lip service but transformation. Once awakened, it reorganizes everything: thought, perception, action, destiny. This is why his silence still speaks. It whispers across millennia. Do not look outward. Do not wait for thunder or trumpets. The flame already burns in you. You are the temple. You are the vessel. You are the word. And when you remember this, the search ends not because you have found a phrase, but because you have become the flame itself. For the fire he carried was never his alone. It was the inheritance of every soul willing to ignite. From the beginning, the message of fire was never meant to comfort, but to transform. That is why Jesus spoke so often in paradoxes, truth hidden in contradiction. Those who lose their life will find it. The last shall be first. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. These are not riddles for entertainment. They are maps of the inner combustion. To awaken the word of fire, the false self must die. The ego must burn, the mask must collapse. Only then does the eternal self emerge, radiant and free. The path is not safe. It is demanding. But it is the only path that leads to true awakening. The fire was never about institutions. Religion, as history unfolded, often feared it. Hierarchies sought to tame it, to confine it in ritual and doctrine. But fire cannot be domesticated. It leaps, it spreads, it consumes, it transforms. That is why so much of institutional history is marked by attempts to control the flame, even as mystics, prophets, and seekers kept it alive underground. In desert caves, monasteries, Sufi lodges, Zen temples, and hidden circles of Kabbalists, the same truth was whispered. The divine spark lives within. And when awakened, it makes every human a living temple, every heart an altar, every silence a burning bush. Science itself is beginning to stumble upon what mystics always knew. Frequencies can heal or destroy. Sound therapy is used to shatter kidney stones, to ease trauma, to align brainwaves. Quantum physics teaches that matter is vibration, that reality itself is structured by unseen resonance. If ordinary sound can transform biology, what of the primordial sound, the word of fire that aligns the soul with creation itself? The ancients were not naive. They were describing in symbolic language what modern science is only now beginning to measure. That vibration is the skeleton of reality. And Jesus, walking centuries ahead of his time, embodied this vibration fully. That is why his presence alone changed lives. Crowds felt warmth, clarity, healing simply by being near him. He was not performing magic tricks. He was radiating coherence. His field of being was so aligned with the source that dissonance dissolved in his presence. Disease, despair, and fear could not persist where the fire burned so purely. The silence he kept was not empty, it was transmission. A presence that needed no syllables to awaken what was already waiting in the hearts of others. His silence was more eloquent than books, more powerful than sermons, more enduring than empires. This is the danger and the promise. The fire, once awakened, cannot be controlled. It does not serve political thrones or religious hierarchies. It breaks chains instead of forging them. It awakens instead of pacifying. That is why it was hidden, not because humanity was unworthy, but because humanity was unready. Knowledge without conscience becomes tyranny. Fire in untrained hands becomes destruction. By keeping silent, Jesus gave the world time to ripen, ensuring that when the flame finally spread, it would be carried not by fear but by love. Even now, the invitation stands. The fire is here, in every breath, every silence, every moment of surrender. To awaken it requires no temple, no priest, no formula. It requires courage to step into silence, humility to strip away illusions, and love to let the heart burn clean. It requires gratitude in suffering, compassion in action, authenticity in being. These are not moral commands, but vibrational alignments. Each act of forgiveness feeds the flame. Each act of love stokes it brighter. Each act of truth clears the space where it can blaze without distortion. And when it ignites, everything changes. Words are no longer noise but light. Actions are no longer effort but resonance. Life itself becomes revelation. The seeker no longer pursues truth but lives it. The gospel is no longer read but embodied. The fire does not ask for worship, it asks for transformation. It does not demand belief, it demands becoming. And when it burns, the old self dies, and the eternal self stands revealed, luminous, untamed, indestructible. This was the unspoken legacy of Jesus. Not doctrines, but flame. Not commandments, but resonance. Not institutions, but ignition. His silence was not withholding, but giving us the chance to discover within ourselves the fire that no empire can silence, no dogma can cage, no death can extinguish. The word of fire has never been hidden. It has always been waiting. And now, as ever, it asks the only question that matters. Will you burn? The image of fire has always been both feared and revered. Civilizations rose around the hearth, worshipped the sun, guarded the flame as sacred. To lose fire was to lose life itself. Yet the fire Jesus spoke of was not confined to wood or stone. It was the fire of consciousness, the eternal blaze of the soul. To encounter it is to face a paradox. It burns, but it also heals. It destroys, but it also creates. It consumes the false, but it liberates the true. This is why his silence carried more weight than volumes of sermons. He was not introducing an idea. He was preparing humanity for ignition. When we examine the geopolitics of the first century, we see why silence was essential. Rome tolerated religions as long as they reinforced order. Any teaching that hinted at inner divinity, independent of Caesar or priestly intermediaries, threatened the very architecture of empire. If every human carried the word of fire, what need would they have for imperial decrees? If peasants and slaves discovered the same flame as kings and governors, what power could hierarchy hold? The fire was not only spiritual, it was revolutionary. To reveal it openly would have been to invite annihilation, not only for himself but for his followers. His silence was not retreat but resistance, a refusal to hand over dynamite to an empire desperate to maintain control. That is why he spoke in parables, why he used stories of seeds, sheep, and vineyards. These were not distractions but disguises. To the uninitiated, they seemed harmless lessons about morality. To those who listened deeply, they were codes pointing to the inner blaze. The mustard seed that grows into a great tree, the treasure buried in a field, the pearl of great price, all were metaphors for the fire within, hidden, small at first, but destined to transform everything once uncovered. His silence was the final parable, the unspoken story that demanded each seeker dig within to discover the treasure themselves. The word of fire, then, is not an artifact of the past, but a present reality. It is the silent resonance that reorganizes everything when we align with it. This is why history is filled with mystics who, though never meeting Jesus, echoed his silence. Rumi, the Sufi poet, wrote, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." Meister Eckhart, the German mystic, declared, "There is nothing so much like God as silence." Across traditions, silence emerges not as emptiness but as fullness, the chamber where the fire is felt, the furnace where illusion burns away, the place where truth speaks without words. Today, in an age of noise, the lesson is more urgent than ever. Never before has humanity been so saturated with voices, messages, distractions, and never before has silence been so revolutionary. To step into silence is to step out of the machinery of control, to resist the empire of noise, to refuse to be manipulated by fear or propaganda. Silence becomes not passivity, but defiance, a declaration that the true word cannot be bought, sold, or censored. It lives in the vibration of the soul, unshaken by the chaos of the world. This fire, once awakened, does not end with personal transformation. It radiates outward, touching families, communities, societies. It challenges injustice not with slogans but with presence. It heals division not with argument but with resonance. It builds bridges not with strategies but with authenticity. The word of fire is not about escape from the world but engagement. with it engagement from a place of unshakable truth, fearless love, and radiant silence. It is not a retreat, but an advance, not an evasion, but a confrontation. For when illusions burn, only justice, compassion, and freedom remain. This is why the word of fire cannot be owned. No religion, no nation, no ideology can claim it. It does not belong to the past, it is the inheritance of every soul. Jesus' silence made sure of that. By refusing to reveal it in syllables, he ensured it could never be monopolized, never distorted into dogma. It is not in temples or books, but in the hidden chamber of the heart. There, in silence, the fire waits, unquenchable, eternal, ready to ignite whenever the soul dares to surrender. And once it burns, it spreads not as doctrine, but as light. Every empire that has tried to extinguish the flame has failed. Rome crucified him, yet his silence roared louder than their decrees. The church institutionalized his message, yet mystics and rebels kept finding the flame outside its walls. Tyrants censored books, burned heretics, outlawed visions, but the word of fire is not ink on paper. It is vibration, hidden where no sword or counsel can reach. It passes quietly from generation to generation, not always in words, but in eyes that shine, in presences that heal, in lives that burn with authenticity. History proves the same truth again and again. Fire cannot be contained. It leaps across borders, across centuries, across every attempt at control. That is why the most dangerous idea in history has never been a political manifesto or a military strategy. It is the revelation that every human being carries the same spark of divinity, the same inner fire that empires fear. If peasants, slaves, women, outcasts all discovered the flame equally within them, the hierarchy of power would collapse overnight. This is the essence of the kingdom Jesus spoke of, a realm not of thrones and palaces, but of awakened souls. It is a kingdom Rome could never tax, armies could never conquer, priests could never monopolize. It is a kingdom that begins in silence and spreads through resonance. That is why he warned, "The kingdom of God does not come with observation, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." Modern systems of power are no different. Governments, corporations, even media thrive by keeping people distracted, fragmented, asleep. A humanity awakened to its inner fire is ungovernable, not because it rebels in chaos, but because it no longer fears, no longer consumes illusions, no longer bends to lies. The word of fire is the greatest threat to manipulation because it cannot be bought, sold, or weaponized. It makes people free, and freedom terrifies systems built on control. This is why silence is still revolutionary. To enter silence today is to step out of the machinery of distraction and tune into the vibration that cannot be silenced. But the fire is not merely resistance, it is creation. It reorganizes lives, families, communities. A person who carries the flame no longer acts from ego but from resonance. Words spoken from the fire are not opinions, they are catalysts. Actions taken from the fire are not strategies, they are alignments with truth. Such a person becomes a walking gospel, a living scripture, their very presence radiating what no doctrine could capture. This was always the goal, not followers repeating formulas, but human beings burning with authenticity, carrying the flame wherever they go. Mystics across ages describe the same transformation. Teresa of Avila spoke of an interior castle, where the soul meets the divine flame. Rumi urged, "Set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames." The desert fathers of early Christianity left cities to burn away distractions in silence, becoming torches in the wasteland. Buddhist masters compared enlightenment to a lamp lit from another lamp. Once the fire spreads, it never diminishes, it only multiplies. The parallels are undeniable. The word of fire is not bound to any one tradition. It is the birthright of all humanity, and so, the silence of Jesus was not the end of revelation, but its beginning. By withholding, he ensured that seekers would turn inward, that the flame would be discovered in the only place it could never be corrupted within. His silence was the final teaching. the last parable, the greatest invitation. For what he did, not say, resounds louder than all that he spoke. The absence itself became the message. The word of fire is not outside. It is here. It is you. It is waiting. This is why, 2,000 years later, the silence still burns. It whispers in the restless hearts of seekers, in the courage of those who defy oppression, in the tenderness of those who love without condition. The word of fire has never been lost. It has only been waiting for ears brave enough to hear, for souls ready to burn, for humanity prepared to live not as shadows but as flame. And once it ignites, it will not stop. For fire, once kindled, does not return to silence. It spreads, it transforms, it conquers the darkness without a word. There is a reason humanity has always both feared and revered fire. It is the element that refuses compromise. Water can be contained, earth can be shaped, air can be harnessed, but fire will either transform or consume. It cannot be halfway. It either burns or it dies. The same is true of the word of fire. Once awakened, it demands totality. It does not allow us to cling to illusions, half-truths, or masks. It burns them away. This is why so many, then and now, resist it. It is easier to remain in comfort, even in chains, than to step into the flame that strips everything false. Yet this is the only path to freedom. Jesus did not call for comfort. He called for fire. Think of the countless revolutions in human history, moments when the oppressed stood up, when new ideas overturned empires, when visionaries risked their lives for truths greater than themselves. At the root of each was a spark, a fire that began in silence, in one heart, in one hidden corner, until it spread like wildfire. The French Revolution began not on the battlefield, but in whispered salons. The American independence movement began with secret gatherings in taverns. Even today, revolutions begin in the unseen, in ideas, in courage, in refusal to bow. The word of fire is the eternal spark behind every true liberation, whether spiritual or political. It is the flame that empires fear most because it does not fight with swords. It burns from within, unstoppable. This is why silence remains central. Silence is where fire gathers strength. Empires thrive on noise, propaganda, distraction, endless chatter that drowns out the inner voice. But in silence, the illusions collapse. In silence, we begin to hear the vibration beneath the noise. In silence, we rediscover the word of fire already burning within us. This is the true resistance, not loud rebellion, but inner ignition. When enough hearts burn, the world changes without a single proclamation. This is why Jesus could stand before governors and soldiers in silence. He did not need to shout. The fire he carried would outlast their empires. Modern science inadvertently confirms what mystics always knew. Energy precedes matter. Thought shapes reality. Frequency organizes form. We live in a universe of resonance where even the smallest vibration ripples outward, shaping the whole. What we speak, what we radiate, what we embody, these are not insignificant. They alter the field around us. The word of fire, as the purest resonance, has the power to realign everything. It is no wonder that healings occurred in his presence, that despair turned into hope, that division turned into unity. He was not manipulating reality, he was embodying its deepest truth, and this truth is available to every soul willing to enter silence and ignite the flame. But the fire is not given cheaply. It demands purification. This is why mystics across cultures embraced fasting, solitude, surrender. It was never about punishment, but about clearing space for the flame. A vessel filled with noise, pride, fear, or greed cannot carry fire safely. It will distort it, weaponize it, corrupt it. This is the tragedy of history, how sacred words, once alive, were twisted into tools of power. How scriptures meant to free were used to enslave. How teachings meant to ignite were dulled into rituals. And yet, the flame never died. Hidden in monasteries, whispered in poetry, encoded in art, it survived, waiting for souls to awaken and carry it forward. Today, the invitation is the same. Will we remain in noise, enslaved by distraction, manipulated by fear? Or will we dare silence, risk fire, and let the flame transform us? The choice is not collective at first. It is personal. The fire begins in one heart, in one silence, in one surrender, and then it spreads. A parent who awakens passes the flame to children. A teacher who burns with truth ignites students. A stranger carrying silent love alters the vibration of everyone they meet. This is how the fire spreads, not through conquest, but through resonance, one life at a time. And when enough lives burn, empires tremble, not because they are attacked, but because they are revealed as illusions. Fear loses its grip. Lies collapse under the weight of authenticity. Darkness cannot withstand the radiance of awakened souls. This is the revolution Jesus prepared. The kingdom he spoke of, the fire he longed to kindle. Not a kingdom of thrones, but of flames. Not an empire of laws, but of resonance. A fire that spreads not by violence, but by transformation. Not by domination, but by awakening. This is the legacy of his silence, the destiny of the word of fire. The greatest paradox of the word of fire is that it cannot be possessed, only lived. Empires tried to own it. Priests tried to guard it. Scholars tried to define it. But fire belongs to no one. The moment we attempt to grasp it, it slips through our fingers, for it was never meant to be property. It was meant to be presence. Jesus never told his followers to memorize formulas. He told them to become light. He never urged them to build monuments. He urged them to carry the flame. His silence was the final safeguard, ensuring that the fire would not become an institution's possession, but humanity's inheritance. The suppression of this truth is not just ancient history. Every age finds new ways to smother the flame. In the medieval world, inquisitions burned those whose inner fire threatened orthodoxy. In modern times, consumer culture drowns the spark beneath endless distraction, making people too busy, too anxious, too numb to remember their own divinity. And yet every attempt at suppression has failed. Mystics have continued to burn in silence. Artists have hidden fire in their creations. Poets have smuggled it into verses. Scientists have stumbled upon it in their discoveries. The fire does not die. It hides. It waits. And when the time is right, it spreads again. This is why the most revolutionary act in any age is not rebellion in the streets, but awakening in the soul. A single awakened person carries more power than armies because their very presence radiates freedom. Chains cannot bind a burning heart. Fear cannot control a soul on fire. Systems of oppression collapse when confronted not with violence but with truth lived so fully it exposes their illusion. This is why empires crucify prophets. Not because they are violent, but because they are untouchable. The word of fire is the most dangerous weapon against tyranny, because it cannot be silenced, cannot be bought, cannot be killed. Silence, then, is not emptiness. It is fuel. It is in silence that the fire grows strong, unpolluted by ego or noise. This is why Jesus so often withdrew to mountains and deserts. He was not escaping, he was igniting. In solitude, he stoked the flame until it blazed so brightly that even death could not extinguish it. His resurrection was not a miracle to impress. It was the natural consequence of a life lived entirely in the fire. Death cannot hold what is already eternal. The word of fire outlasts every grave. For us, the path is the same. To carry the fire is not to speak secret words, but to live a secret unveiled, to embody authenticity, love, and truth so fully that illusions fall away wherever we walk. It requires courage to step into silence, humility to surrender ego, and faith to endure the burning. But when the fire awakens, it transforms everything. Relationships become altars. Work becomes offering. Life itself becomes scripture. We no longer search for the word of fire, we become it. And that is the true legacy of Jesus' silence. Not words on parchment, but flames in human hearts. The choice remains ours. We can continue to live as shadows, repeating borrowed words, trapped in fear. Or we can step into the silence, surrender, and ignite. The fire is not waiting in heaven. It is here. It is now. It is in us. And once it burns, There is no going back. The word of fire is not history. It is destiny. It is the soundless sound calling humanity to awaken, the eternal flame waiting for those who dare to burn. And when it spreads, the world as we know it will not end, it will be reborn. At the heart of it all lies a simple but terrifying truth. The word of fire was never meant to be external. It was never hidden in the sky, never buried in scriptures, never locked in temples. It was always inside, waiting for silence, waiting for surrender, waiting for the courage to let it burn. This is the final revelation. The silence of Jesus was not withholding, it was pointing inward, pointing home, pointing to the spark already alive in every soul. His greatest sermon was not spoken on a mountaintop, but in the refusal to speak at all, in the trust that humanity would one day find the flame within themselves. When we look at history through this lens, everything changes. The rise and fall of empires, the building of cathedrals, the blood spilled in his name, all of it is background noise compared to the flame that has quietly spread, heart to heart, century after century. The councils that cut gospels from the canon thought they were controlling truth, but in reality, they only confirmed it. The word of fire cannot be contained in books. The inquisitions that tried to stamp out heresy only fanned the flames further, for truth shines brightest under persecution. Even today, in an age of technology, surveillance, and endless distraction, the silence still speaks, calling souls to remember. The fire does not belong to yesterday, it belongs to now. Modern seekers feel this more urgently than ever. With science unraveling the mysteries of vibration, with psychology mapping the depths of consciousness, with a global hunger for meaning beyond materialism, we stand at a crossroads. The noise of the world grows louder, but so does the whisper of the flame. The question is no longer whether the word of fire exists, it is whether we will dare to listen. Will we step into silence, even for a moment, and let it ignite? Will we trust what cannot be explained, surrender what cannot be controlled, and allow the fire to remake us? Or will we cling to noise, to comfort, to illusions that cannot last? The silence of Jesus remains the challenge. It dares us to look beyond words, beyond dogma, beyond history, into the core of our own being. It dares us to risk transformation. For to awaken the fire is not to add something new, but to strip away everything false, until only essence remains. It is to become light in a world still bound in shadows. It is to live as flame in an age of ash. And this is the revolution greater than all revolutions, not the overthrow of governments, but the awakening of humanity to its own divinity. Perhaps this was the truest meaning of his promise. You will do even greater things than these. He was not offering power to perform spectacles. He was declaring that once the fire spread, once humanity remembered, the flame would not remain in one man but would ignite across millions. His silence was trust in us that we would eventually be ready to burn, that we would not destroy ourselves with the fire but be remade by it, that we would not worship the flame from afar but carry it within. And so the story continues. The word of fire has never been lost. It has only been waiting for you, for me, for all of us. Waiting in silence, waiting in every moment of surrender, waiting in every act of love. The flame is here, unquenchable, eternal, closer than breath. And the question remains the same as it was 2,000 years ago. Will we dare to ignite? Will we let the fire burn, even if it consumes all that is false? Will we step into the silence and become the word ourselves? The choice is ours. And once we make it, there is no turning back. For the fire, once kindled, will spread not as destruction, but as rebirth. Not as chaos, but as truth. Not as noise, but as the eternal silence that speaks louder than all words. This is the legacy of Jesus, the meaning of his silence, the destiny of humanity. The word of fire is not behind us. It is before us, and its time has come.